Hey everyone, it's Peter from Compass Community Church. I'm very excited to share news of the return of our weekly messages. Many of you will remember from previous experiences watching us on our YouTube channel that there were just 20-minute messages that were recorded and posted on Sunday mornings. They premiered each Sunday at 10 o'clock. And we suspended that for about 2 months or so as we are in a transition here in this church, as we are going into a new identity as Compass Community Church. There are some things we're sorting out, but we're so grateful to know that the posting of weekly messages is now being revived, starting this week and in weeks to come. And in addition to that, you may have already seen the posting of a Compass Point video, the shorter midweek videos that we are recording and posting. Many of them will just be anticipating or introducing you to the message that will be shared on Sundays, and that's something that we're also going to be doing on a regular basis. And in addition to that, we will be recording our full Sunday worship services here at Compass Community Church, not live streaming them, but recording them, editing them, and then posting them later in the day. So these 3 different ways of connecting with you on YouTube and on Facebook are hopefully going to be ways that you appreciate and ways that will enable you to experience the joy of walking with God and knowing you're a part of a growing community at Compass Community Church. I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and share messages with others for whom you think they may be helpful. And find us on Facebook as well. All of these opportunities are ways for us to connect with you and to strengthen your walk with the Lord. So this Sunday, July 24, we are reflecting on an incredible story from the Old Testament. Many of you will know the story well. It's the story of the Old Testament people of Israel who left Egypt after hundreds of years of slavery there and who crossed the Red Sea because God was bringing them to a place that He had in mind for them. When you think about the crossing of the Red Sea, you may think of the Prince of Egypt, that animated depiction of this story from about 20 years ago or more. You may think of Charlton Heston and the 10 Commandments, that incredible depiction of the people crossing the Red Sea decades ago. That film was produced. It's an incredibly powerful story, and it still speaks such important lessons into our lives today. And if you watched the Compass Point video from a few days ago, I introduced it by helping us remember what it was like when we were little children and when we were parents, perhaps of small children. We would remind them of how important it was for them to look both ways before they crossed the street. I remember teaching our children this simple rhyme: look both ways before you cross the street. Stop, look, and listen before you cross the street. First you use your ears and eyes, and then you use your feet. Simple advice, very good advice. And what we see in Exodus chapter 14 is the importance of the people looking both ways before they cross not the street, but the sea. And looking not to the right and to the left, those dimensions of looking both ways, but looking ahead of them and behind them. Because what we see in Exodus 14 is an incredible reminder of not only these imposing realities, the sea in front of them and the Egyptian army behind them, these adversaries, these obstacles that were impossible for them to deal with and overcome. When they looked ahead of them and behind them, they were afraid, they were worried, but they also saw the presence of God ahead of them and behind them. And that's the most important lesson of this Old Testament story, and why we need to look both ways in our lives, in our earthly journey, ahead of us and behind us, and seeing not only things there that are imposing and difficult and challenging, but see also the glorious, powerful presence of God there. It's an amazing story. And as we step into this story and imagine what it was like for the people of Israel to walk through the sea and be delivered not only from the waters of the Red Sea, but from the Egyptian army behind them, we see an incredible lesson about what it means for us to know that God is with us, God fights for us, God delivers us. Sometimes when we look behind us, we see things in our lives that are difficult, that are frightening, experiences that we've gone through that still impact our lives, perhaps many, many years later. Sometimes we think the past is going to catch up with us. There are things we've done that we regret. We wish we could undo them, Looking behind us at our past sometimes fills us with worry, with anxiety. We might wonder if we'll ever get out from under some of those things that we've done or things that have been done to us. And then when we look ahead of us, sometimes we also feel very frightened and worried because the future is uncertain. We've certainly gotten used to that for the last couple of years during this COVID pandemic, wondering what kind of future there would be for us, for our loved ones. And in addition to that, there are all kinds of concerns related to health issues, financial sustainability for ourselves, for our children, our grandchildren. We wonder how they're going to be able to afford homes. We wonder how we're going to be able to make ends meet with the rising cost of food and fuel. Sometimes when we look ahead of us, when we wonder what the future has in store for us and our loved ones, we can be very afraid. We can wonder where God is in all of that. But we need to look both ways before we cross the sea, before we cross whatever barrier there is between us and the future we hope to find someday. We find not only obstacles and adversaries, but we find the presence of God, always ahead of us, always behind us, always with us in the journey of life. There are a couple of verses in Exodus 14 that I want to just highlight with you. In verses 19 through 20, we read these words that talk about how the presence of God that was ahead of the people actually moved and went behind them. Exodus 14, 19 and 20. The angel of God who had been traveling in front of Israel's army withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front of them and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. I love that image, and it must have been incredibly reassuring for the people of Israel to see the glorious, fiery presence of God that was in front of them move to go behind them, providing a firewall, literally, between them and the Egyptian army. That was incredibly reassuring for them to know that the God who was ahead of them was also now behind them. They could be still in the presence of God, which is exactly what God tells the people through Moses. In verses 13 and 14, Moses says this to the people, "Don't be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." I love that verse, and it's such an incredibly important verse for us today. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. They could be still because the Lord was with them. They were literally surrounded by God. The God who was in front of them and now behind them would fight for them. That verb, be still, is an interesting verb. It literally means be quiet, stop talking, fall silent. It's an appropriate bit of instruction that God gave them because the people were complaining. They were angry with Moses, wondering why he ever led them out of Egypt. They thought it would have been better to stay in Egypt. They were complaining, grumbling, frightened. And God says to them in all of that, be quiet, be still, fall silent. Trust me. They do get active, and we all need to get active in our relationship with God. It's not all just being quiet and doing nothing. But we do that only because we know who God is, the God who fights for us. They could get up, that's the active part. They could walk through the sea because God made a way for them. God led them through. He saved them from the Egyptians behind them and walked them through the sea that was in front of them. This is important for us to remember because it indicates that any person's relationship with God rests ultimately and primarily on God's work. It's not up to us to figure it out, to defeat whatever adversaries we are coming up against, to overcome whatever obstacle we encounter. We don't do this. We don't need to. God does it. And so the active part of being a follower of Jesus Christ comes only after we recognize what God is doing. God takes the primary action. He fights for us, and we can rest and be still because of that. It makes me think of another verse in the Old Testament, Psalm 46, verse 10. It's a favorite verse for many people. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46 is a psalm that describes incredible cataclysmic tumult. The earth is literally falling apart. The seas are raging. The mountains are crumbling into the seas. And yet there, in the very middle of the psalm, in the middle of all of that devastation, be still and know that I am God. It's incredibly comforting for us to know that when our world is falling apart, when we face adversaries and obstacles that are impossible for us to overcome, we can be still because God is with us. He's fighting for us. We can rest in Him. That also is an interesting Hebrew verb in Psalm 46, verse 10. It's a different verb than the one in Exodus 14. It literally means hang limp, let go, give in, surrender. Now, at first, that doesn't sound very helpful or promising. What is that verb telling us? Just cave in, do nothing, just let yourself go, lose to all of those situations that are impossible for you to overcome? No, it doesn't mean that. On the one hand, it means that. Just let go, stop fighting, rest, go limp, give in, but do all of this because you know who God is. Be still and know that I am God. That's why the people in Exodus 14 could be still, because they knew who God was. God said, I will fight for you. And so we can be still in our lives, even and especially in all of those stressful situations that we sometimes find ourselves in, because we've studied God. We know who He is. We've seen in Scripture and in our own lives how God acts. We know the character of God. We've heard His promises. We trust them. All these things enable us to be still, to go limp, to become passive, because we know God is the active one. I will fight for you. Be quiet. Give in to me. Surrender to my control. Stop trying to make it through life on your own. Be still. One person's take on this reads as follows: allow yourself to become completely weak and feeble. Let go of your need to control your own life, and let go of your messed up ideas about how strong you are. And what you will discover is an intimate, up-close understanding of God that you would have never experienced otherwise. It's hard for us to give in. It's hard for us to allow ourselves to become completely weak, because the world doesn't honor that. The world loves strong, self-reliant, capable people. Doesn't have a lot of acceptance or regard for people who are weak, who seemingly lack the capacity to get through life on their own. But this is precisely what God invites, in fact, commands us to do, to let go. To let go of our own self-reliance and to let go of our own false ideas and preconceived notions about how strong and independent we are. We need to let go of all of that and rest in the awareness of who God is. I will fight for you. I love how God does that in the story of how the people walked through the sea. He fought for them. He confused the Egyptians. He enabled these just previous slaves, people who only recently have been delivered from their slavery. They were weak, they were vulnerable, they had no resources. God fought for them. What an incredible message for us when we feel weak, when we feel as if we can't get through whatever it is that we are facing. When the world and people around us don't have a lot of trust or confidence in us, God fights for us. And God has fought for us in a way that is even greater than the way the story of the people traveling through the Red Sea illustrates. He has fought for us in the coming of Jesus Christ, the God who literally is Emmanuel, God with us, the one who has come to be with us in all of the struggles of our lives, who is always ahead of us, always behind us, surrounding us with His love, with His compassion, with His grace. He fought enemies far greater than the Red Sea and an Egyptian army. He fought the powers of sin and evil and death. He did this for us. And we can rest in the finished work of Jesus Christ, the greater Moses, the one who in a far greater way leads His people on out of sin, out of the ultimate slavery to sin and the power of evil, into a place of abundance and peace. Frederick Buechner, in one of his messages on the Exodus, identifies Jesus as the true Moses. It is his mighty hand that turns back the waters of the world. He is our Exodus. His hands do this. Moses stretched out his hands over the Red Sea, but the hands of Jesus are stretched out in blessing. The hands of Jesus that were crucified, that even after his resurrection still bore the marks of his crucifixion. He's battle-scarred, this warrior Christ. And it's because of what he's done for us, how he has fought for us, that enables us to live a life of trust and confidence and poise and peace. Because he is with us, he leads us on and through, we can rest in him. I hope this message has given you encouragement today. I hope it has enabled you to even experience what it means to rest and be still. Some of you are going through difficult situations. Things happen that have just come up out of nowhere. You face obstacles that you've never imagined. And maybe you're still wondering about that past that troubles you. God has dealt with that. God wants to lead you out of that. You can trust his promises. You can rest in him. He's behind us. He's ahead of us. He is always beside us. And so I hope as you look both ways, as you walk this life, looking ahead of you and behind you, you will see not only enemies and obstacles, but more importantly and ultimately, you will see the glorious, fiery, powerful presence of God, who is leading you on, who is fighting for you, the one in whom you can rest and find peace. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope it's been encouraging. I hope it has enabled you to have a renewed sense of how good God is, how God is a mighty warrior and a compassionate, loving friend, ahead, behind, beside. Be well and be blessed.